This is a table they have. It goes from, basically, the columns go from good to bad: adult, mature, aging, and elderly. And Smalltalk was listed as elderly. And kind of the conclusion is, get off this as fast as possible. But it's no longer their position. Their position now is that Smalltalk is a mature language. At least the active and currently supported Smalltalks are mature. And mature has a lot of good things. Port to latest version, stable, good community, a lot of positive messages that tell people that this is a low-risk, safe choice, good place to be. So we're very happy about that. Actually, I was on the phone last week. Cincom was on the phone with Arden. I was lobbying that some of these things would even be into the adult category. So we can almost be even adult/mature. But I'll sure take mature over elderly. Any day. So this is really good news. I mean, some organizations look to this information, and if it's a real negative there, it's end of story right there. So I think this is a real sign of the times of where Smalltalk is resurging. Some of the things I'll cover: what kind of information we can make available, and overall, it's a really good time, a great time to be involved with Smalltalk. At Cincom, for example, what we're seeing current customers expanding their use, adding licenses. We've been picking up new Smalltalk customers. Also, if you just look out and see what's going on in general, you see there's new Smalltalks. There's a Smalltalk 6. There's an Iron Smalltalk project starting up. There's languages that were heavily influenced by it, like IO, and of course things like Ruby and even Python. And there's new experimental languages that are, it's kind of notable that they're borrowing from at deeper levels from Smalltalk. Things like the Newspeak language that we saw a couple of days ago. One thing that's really interesting, I mean, it's preaching to the choir here, but I want to emphasize about some of the messaging to get out to people about Smalltalk. Everyone here is probably well aware and well versed on the legacy and how it started at Xerox PARC, and how they pretty much invented almost all the things that we take for granted today in computing. But a lot of people don't know that story. There's a whole generation of new developers that just don't know this. And I went through describing this to some people, and you can almost just see their jaws drop. Wow, I had no idea about the significance and the history and the impact that Smalltalk has had. You just ask them, look at the computer in front of you. What do you see? I see windows, I see icons, I can do drag and drop. All those things were pioneered in Smalltalk. It's had a real big impact on things that we use every day. Even a lot of people don't realize the office metaphor. Well, why do we have things for files? Why do we have things like file cabinets? Where did that office metaphor come from? It came from most of the work in Smalltalk at Xerox PARC. We had this whole office metaphor, and that's carried through heavily with what we use today. It's often worth going over that with people who are unfamiliar with the whole history and the impact that Smalltalk has had. We have to differentiate in some ways. How is Smalltalk different? And really the whole birth of Smalltalk, it was really a very unusual environment in that it was built in a research lab. And I've talked with at least one person who worked back at Xerox PARC in the 70s in Smalltalk. And I was told that the guy running PARC, Bob Taylor, I believe it was, he was a really, really bright guy, well connected, and they were able to get a lot of really bright people. So you had a lot of very bright creative people spending a decade where they build stuff, and Alan Kay's notorious for having said, burn the disk packs every 2 years, throw it all away, let's start with a clean slate. Let's not be burdened by the legacy of what we've done. That's even pretty rare today. They started from scratch every 2 years. And we know the whole goal of this was to make computing easy for people. Learning focus. And the whole thing is, this whole set of circumstances is extremely rare. How else is Smalltalk different? We know in all the productivity studies that we've seen, it's really as productive as a fourth generation language or a very specific, domain-specific language like using a spreadsheet is very, very productive for spreadsheet-like things. Well, you get similar kind of numbers for Smalltalk, but Smalltalk is general purpose, extremely productive. You know about the elegance, the beauty, the simplicity, the robustness of language, all the pioneering work that was done in Park, but that continues today. If you look at, if you ask people, have you heard of design patterns? Have you ever heard of wikis? The modern unit testing that we use, all those were really pioneered by Smalltalk. Even other things, we use Java, or the Java VM, Smalltalk, Eclipse, Smalltalk. So Smalltalkers still have a major influence on a lot of things. It's good to make people aware of those so they can approach it. But even if they're not that interested, you can tell them about all these things it's done. Here's the message. Just try it anyway. You'll be better off for the experience. So one of the things that we often hear from developers is that, well, I was doing OO for a while and using Java or C++, but then I picked up Smalltalk and it went click. I really got it for the first time. And now I'm a much better developer in whatever language I choose. So encourage people just to pick it up. It'll be better for the experience. Even if you don't want to use it, that's okay. I think it's beneficial to the community just for more people to be aware of the technology, to understand the technology, and be exposed to it. So, and of course, we hope that they'll pick it up. Well, I don't want to really use it, but let me just learn it so I understand these concepts better, and we'll get a certain percentage of those people who become converts. You can sell, well, even if you just want to do some experimental proof of concept work, and then later implement it in whatever else you want. Try this. We're better off for having people pick it up and use it. The more who are exposed to it, the more people will eventually get into the community. Smalltalk second surge. One big point was Smalltalk really came out ahead of its time. It was ahead of the machine curve. We know one of the negatives that often still hangs with it as well. Well, it's slow. It's interpreted, which neither are true. They haven't been true for a long, long, long time. We have jitted Smalltalks. We have the machine power has well exceeded the ability to run it really, really well. So it kind of got that stigma at the beginning, but one of the things that happened, there's a number of things that are happening now that are causing Smalltalk to resurge again. One of the things is dynamic languages are becoming hot again. And part of that is because people are recognizing the benefits of dynamic language. They're becoming more mainstream acceptance of those benefits. And that helps Smalltalk and to point out, well, this is one of the original. I'll talk more about this, about the borrowed features, but a lot of other languages have borrowed from Smalltalk. but they miss key features. So, and if you think of it, Smalltalk was so well designed. I expect in 50 years from now, we'll see languages like Lisp and Smalltalk still around, because they were just so, they just have some just brilliance behind them. They're so well designed. I like to tell a story to people. This was actually, if you saw years ago, the PBS program Triumph of the Nerds. There was people like Adele Goldberg and Steve Jobs and other people, early industry people, all involved with this were all interviewed. And Steve Jobs basically said, well, when I visited Xerox PARC, they showed me three things. But all I really saw was the graphical user interface. That's all I saw, and I took that away. I was blinded by it. And he went off and did things with that. The analogy that I like to make is that, well, other people looked at Smalltalk also, and they were blinded by OO. And they kind of grabbed some of that low-hanging fruit from the language, and they grafted those ideas into their own language and syntax. So here's the question. Okay, they took that, but what did they miss? Are there some really important things there, some really critical things with a big impact that they just simply overlooked? And I've outlined three things that I think that they overlooked and are becoming more and more important in today's marketplace. The first thing is closures. Closures, blocks in Smalltalk, and the clean, simple way they're integrated into the language. They're really responsible for a lot of the magic in Smalltalk. One thing you may often hear from people, I hear, well, Smalltalk is old. Well, I look at this other language, and every couple of years they're adding new control structures and keywords and other things to the language. They're keeping that language up to date. It's newer. It's being constantly worked on. And the thing is, because of closures in Smalltalk, it's possible to add new control structures. And we've seen them added over the years. Things like if nil, if not nil, example of a new control structure. Those can be added without redefining the language. And that's significant. People who just look at Smalltalk, well, it really hasn't changed in a long time. It doesn't need to. It evolves. It keeps up to date. What else needs to happen to keep up to date? New libraries. Writing new libraries to add new protocols, communication, and other things. And all those things have happened and are happening. What else? Another item is reflection. The ability for a program to kind of look introspectively at itself and make modifications. A lot of people think current future in programming lies in metaprogramming. And if you want some examples of, well, what's an example of metaprogramming? Rails and Seaside. Those are good examples of metaprogramming frameworks. And they're done in languages that support metaprogramming pretty well. Smalltalk supports it really well. That's a very good example of a very good reflection environment, and it's a consistent. Trickles all the way down, which is a big advantage. The last item is the syntax. It's almost kind of a double-edged sword. People seem to want to take the ideas of Smalltalk and graft it into a language that they're familiar with. I understand that on one hand, but on the other hand, one of the jewels of Smalltalk is the syntax. It's so simple, clear, consistent, robust. And remember, it was designed to be easy for people. The three basic kinds of messages. And I have something I copied from, this came from Neil. Reportedly, one of the most difficult parts of for people to learn the Smalltalk syntax extended keyword messages they often look at, and it may be the beginning example that they don't quite understand. They find that the most difficult to grok. So here was an example of a memo in English, and the same memo in Smalltalk, obviously an example of a keyword message in Smalltalk. And people understand it when it's presented in a way that's more natural. Which is trying to come in from a language perspective. Well, it's like this in that language, and sometimes there maybe no, but if people understand English, much more natural. Some other things that we can educate folks on, is there are some cultural differences. A developer in one of the C-based languages or Java, and they come home at the end of the day and say, oh, I spent all day in the debugger. It was awful. It was a nightmare. You know, where they say, if they're in a debugger, their notion is things have gone horribly wrong. And it's a really bad place to be. And it's not enjoyable. Where we know, the Smalltalk developer comes home and says, I spent the whole day in the debugger. It was great. I wrote half my application there, you know. I always like to say that the debugger in Smalltalk, it's instant gratification. So we have to educate people. It's almost too bad. Debugger is such an entrenched word. It's almost, it's like live, some type of live environment. We need to educate people that it's more than just a debugger, which is a generally bad thing. And tools, it has them. They're integrated. You don't have to use, VI or Emacs. Those things. Try it out. They're integrated. It offers a lot of advantages. And the whole image-based thing, it's like putting your notebook computer to sleep. You're doing stuff, and you close it goes to sleep. You open it back up, and it's right where you left it. And I know some people are nervous about, well, what if things get broken and can't figure it out? And we can, kind of placate that concern. And they can still rebuild. They can start from a brand new image and load all their stuff in from the database, or from files, or from parcels, to kind of rebuild from scratch. And that's not fully file-based, which they're used to, but it's an in-between that I think if you explain that, they can at least be a little more comfortable with. Slide out on web velocity that basically web velocity was one of the new things that we were trying to grow the Smalltalk community by easing people into the language, exposing them to just doing these web apps, and doing a little bit of scripting in Smalltalk, and as they want to get deeper and deeper into it, they're learning Smalltalk. It's easing them into it without forcing that. You have to declare and sign up that you love Smalltalk, and you're going to learn it and do it. It's not quite as in your face. The stealth approach is important. And that's it. Any questions?
Well, actually, I have three.
Refer?
And comments. So you mentioned the natural thing between Smalltalk and English. There's a very wonderful chapter in a nice book to be read, just published by Anders Verlut, having the strange title, Mentoring Smalltalk. I find the title is totally misplaced. The book is much greater than the title. So I really can recommend this book to you, all of you. The second one about the syntax, if you absolutely want to, there's in the public store a package called Ugly C-like syntax, so load it. I don't know whether it still works in 7.6, and you can look at your message in C syntax. It's terrible. I wrote that package, so. And the last is more of a question. You had a slide indicating was ahead of. And I'm doubting that was is the correct word. So I'm only doing Smalltalk for 25 years, or almost exactly 25 years. And I still feel the was is wrong.
So it still is ahead of its time. Even
So the example I did yesterday about the modifier, there are hidden things you never think about you want to modify. Like the sister class and class and meta class. You think you will never ever use it. And suddenly with the semantic network we had, it was the solution to do it. Or look at the simulation thing we just saw just before by, I don't know where the catcher is. It's not here anymore. There are a couple of PetriNet simulators, and they all are in Smalltalk. There are a couple of semantic network systems, and they all are in Smalltalk. So there are markets or domains where you really think there is no alternative. And the last thing is there has been and still is an ongoing move out of Smalltalk by some people. Have you any idea what is the motivation behind that? And how we can stop it?
How we stop it? Well, part of what hopefully this addresses is some people get the pressure from up above. Or if they go to Gartner, or if they went to Gartner before and said, oh, well, it says get off this, so we're going to get off it. And you get pressure from their management to why are you using this old Smalltalk thing. So it's really important to educate those folks on where things are at.
There's some other reasons that I have come across.
Okay.
Specifically, there's still an ongoing tendency in businesses where there's lots of mergers, and frequently when you've got IT shops that maybe use other languages, when the two IT shops merge, well, those other IT shops, because they're using other languages other than Smalltalk, they have lots of programmers. And so they end up being a larger constituency for the management and owners of the company to consider. So in some cases, they're winning politically because they don't have as many people, they don't have as much power.
That's a true irony, where because of the productivity of Smalltalk, they have a smaller group and they lose on sheer size.
Yeah.
Which is truly an irony.
We should be less productive. I have a comment to make you might find interesting. Apparently, one of the really good books that was written in the late 90s by Shimon Lewis, Smalltalk Objects and Design, it went from hard copy to print on demand and then off into the netherworld of some unknown state. I saw a news release last week that said that they're bringing the book out into hard copy print again.
So Simon Lewis Smalltalk?
Yeah. And then the other comment you made about Gartner that people may not be aware of is that recently they came out with a fairly positive comment about Smalltalk, and that now it's considered a mature language.
We have the slide, actually, yeah. And we were also heavily involved with that.
I'd like to make a less practical comment. We've got a slide up there that says something about Smalltalk being there in 50 years. Well, I don't know how many people here are old enough to grow up through the Star Trek, the original series, but I guarantee you that Mr. Spock, when he said, computer, compute the value of pi to, he never said long ABC or char star ABC because, oh my God, I need lots of space. He never said anything like that. And if you look, there's a few Star Trek episodes in the not too distant past where they actually showed 2 or 3 lines of code on a screen in passing. And it was all English-like, and I think it was Smalltalk. Way back then in the future, I mean...
It's good enough for the next generation of Star Trek.
But seriously, do you really think somebody way off there in the future is going to say char star ABC, open square bracket 2? I don't think so. So it's got to be dynamic language.
One of the things I always said about Smalltalk was, you know, when you size out your project, of course, developers are very optimistic and say, okay, it's about this big problem I'm trying to solve. And once they get into all the, the devil is in the details, once they really get into it, that explodes to this big. With the simplicity of small talk, they can still get their arms around it. In some other languages, it looks this big, because you're also grappling with the language, it explodes to this big, and they can't get their arms around it. So I know I've talked to some customers where they say basically, well, we're in small talk, our application's in small talk, we've been told to migrate it off, but it's failed. Or we told them, this is so difficult and complex a solution space that we were lucky to get it done in any language. And small talk was the one thing that really allowed us to succeed. Also, with people worried about the economy in general, maybe the productivity will be more of an issue that we can leverage to push small talk back to the forefront. There's a lot of, any of the metrics and things that were done always showed in a favorable light, so.
What sort of plan or strategy do you have, to educate all those CIO, CTO, so that they would look more favorable than all the other languages? Because previously all the Java, things like that, because they read something and so on, they try to push the people that they should do this. So why can't we do the similar things? How do you educate those people so they will look at small talk? Be more branded. For example, if you use database, relational database, Oracle, it's the thing to use because it's big and so on, right? Because of marketing case. So what is Cincom planning to do?
But I'll tell you a number of things that we are doing. First, we're taking this message, you just saw it, taking it to our customers to give them information to help them in their justification if they're getting pressure from management. James Robertson, he's very active in his blog. Actually, I blog nowhere near as much as James does. It was on 7 days a week reading information on his blog. We're also active in going out to small talk user groups, Ruby user groups. Anyone who will give us a platform to sit and tell them about what's good about small talk and give a demonstration. I know that the companies involved in STIC, working with places like the Gartner Group, the information you saw. I think all of those will have inroads. Of course, we want to try to get companies and IT shops, let them know, yes, this is again a safe choice from that end, and also the grassroots developers. Maybe who the Ruby people are, maybe. Here's you like that stuff? That's cool stuff. This is cool too. You might enjoy taking a look at this, and we might get some crossover companies.
And you also, I don't think you mentioned this yet. If you did, I missed it. But we don't see it so much in this country. But the OLPC having small talk as one of the activities on there, now has small talk in the hands of 100,000 new people. It's huge.
Good point. Yes.
But didn't IBM muscle their way in? Pardon me, I apologize. Didn't Microsoft muscle their way in so that now it's going to have Windows on it? And
that will be an option for people that are buying it, but they can still buy it with the original sugar, and they'll still have speak on it.
Okay.
It's just a choice for the companies. It's not completely swapped over. It's just
okay.
choice.
I got the impression from some of the news reports that it's just swapped.
Yeah, I may misunderstand too, but I think we're pretty much guaranteed Suite's going to be on there for a long time.
Okay.
Yeah. So.
Question in the back?
Are there any efforts to teach small talk through universities? Or at least encourage it?
We'd certainly like to be there. I don't think we have any. I know we have a program that's available to universities. I'm not aware of any new efforts. I think, and I hope, a lot of the universities, actually we've talked to some universities in the past, and a lot of them are kind of driven by what's the demand, what's the market demand out there, and they'll teach that. So if they start to hear more interested in small talk, I think we can be more successful and getting programs in there. Good point.
And again, let me say that internationally, it's one of the places the U.S. is lagging because the U.S. Instructors are trying to teach to the program of Java and whatever it is that they think is going to sell. But when I asked the question in Brazil, other people coming to my talk, how many have still with Smalltalk? I thought maybe like 2 or 3 raised their hand. About 30% raised their hand. And then when I went up and started checking into that, it turns out that the Brazilian universities are still using Smalltalk to teach OO. And that's today. That's happening now. It's huge.
There was a time when, I guess about 6 months ago, y'all were Cincom was putting some effort into revamping or redoing some of the tutorials that were available online for self-learning Smalltalk. Is that still ongoing?
Yes, we're constantly revising some of the tutorials. We have some, redoing some of the old walkthroughs, take a new person through. And then obviously we're doing things like with web velocity and Seaside and Ward. And that's another area where James Robertson, he does a lot of screencasts, where you can go, okay, I've never used it before, and it'll basically walk you through, starting it up and loading initial things in and using it for the first time. And instead of a manual, you can just kind of watch it online. Or the Object Studio DVD. Yeah, we have the two discs for non-commercial Smalltalk over in the other room over there. You're welcome to. I should just grab one of each. One has VisualWorks 7.6 and Object Studio Classic, and then there's a DVD by itself because it's a Vista certified product. Because we had the extra space, we threw a lot of those screencasts, general Smalltalk screencasts, or even VisualWorks related things on there. We're grabbing both. Does anybody out there, do you guys have any ideas of, are we missing places, and as a community where we can help make more inroads getting the Smalltalk message out, or creating a more positive impression?
Maybe one thing people are looking at how much investment the vendor like Cincom is putting into the further development.
Right, that we're committed to it. Another point kind of on that is that people are expensive, and purchasing Smalltalk compared to free. Developers are expensive. Smalltalk is productive. It's cheaper overall when you look at the big picture to go with something like this because of the productivity. People are expensive and machines are cheap.
I asked Mr. Robertson's question is, and this is in relation to the jobs that are available. And this past year, there were jobs that had opened up at Cincom. And in addressing the issue of what resources is Cincom devoting, based on my conversations, I've been told that the size of your employee base is growing.
Right, the net size has increased. We've replaced a few, but we've also added in addition to that.
So y'all are devoting more people to improving the product, not just more resources, like extra money or something, but you're actually saying we want more people to help us.
Lloyd, do you have any perspective from your point of view? Are you seeing, is it flat, or are you getting more jobs available?
Well, one thing I think, you see some of the biggest projects and new customers of any flavor of Smalltalk that resulted from, ultimately, you trace it back, it was the original success on a project where there wasn't the intent of this, but because it was such a successful software base and solving whatever business problem, whatever industry, it then got spun off into maybe there was, a customer sold off a portion and then it went to a different client, and that became a new Smalltalk project using the same code base, all new developers, all new enhancements, and the original one still existed or ones where that original code base was then developed internally, but then commercialized, even though that might not be the original intent. So again, it was so successful, owing to partly because of its design, and that was in Smalltalk, that it was then spun off as commercial product, and then suddenly have, a whole bunch of companies that bought that product, enhanced it, taking it further as kind of then a vertical market package in their industry, and built on it, and suddenly they're needing Smalltalk programmers. So to the degree you can, another way to look at it is identify which of those clients are out there that are potentially sitting on, in fact, an asset in their software, and somehow, this is very difficult from the outside to do, but to maybe at least educate them about how this has happened at other companies. That there could be that model. I've talked to some people here where, an example is one company had invested a lot of money in a very successful Smalltalk project, never got delivered in production, but it's a real asset and it could be used by other companies. And it's kind of someone coming along and taking it and being aware of that asset and somehow, getting it out there into some other company.
That's a good point you bring up too about the successes of these projects. That's something worth pointing out to people considering Smalltalk. There's a large number of really successful efforts by people who have picked up Smalltalk. I would guess that there would be more, the ratio of successes to failures would be greater than in more traditional technology. A lot of difficult successes out there. The project was difficult, and yet they succeeded. Success stories that we haven't heard? Or?
Yeah, we have a lot of people here, and I know with Alan in the past that, for example, we had a very nice project that you guys worked on, very successful, but unfortunately we cannot use the name and the success story because it was not allowed from the company. So if you guys have a successful story where you are successful with Smalltalk, maybe it would be nice just to have there's the right person to hand it to talk about success stories.
What are you talking about?
Success story, project success story.
Oh, I want more.
There we go.
Who wants to be interviewed? Who wants the story? What are we talking about? I want more. More.
Actually, just one other point while I think of it. I was just talking to another point about Smalltalk. I was talking to Mark Peterson.
He's next door.
He's next door there. He was talking, he's an engineer by training. They use it very successfully at a project at IBM. And he said, we're not developers, and we want to be developers. We have problems to solve. And this is the best language to not be in the way of just solving our problems. That's another point you bring up when talking to prospective people. If you don't want the language, that's an advantage of Smalltalk, right? The language doesn't get in your way. It lets you put more of your brain power on solving your real problems and not grappling with the language and difficulties with it. Alan?
I just wanted to provide some empirical validation about your point about the number of successes. And then I remember sitting around at UPSLA a couple of years ago with, and now the name escapes me, Martin Fowler and Crystal Clear, Alistair Coburn. And they were talking about Smalltalk, and that was definitely one of the things they said, that in terms of the ratio of what they called design starts to completed projects, that Smalltalk had by far the highest ratio. I think highest is good there, or lowest. Anyway, the best ratio in terms of the most design starts getting actually completed. And those are people who've had exposure to a very large number of projects.
Thank you.
Okay. That's one thing about Smalltalk also, is that it inspires you to do more stuff within your software, which is basically what happened to us when creating this craft case, which I think it is a success story. So,
Right, some of the pearls like productivity and enjoyment. If employee retention is important, then
new features that nobody would think about, because we have a language that basically the same stuff that Smalltalk has. You can program the butter because Smalltalk has that, and so on.
okay, thank you very much.